Today we have a speaker whom I've known and now worked with for about 7 years. She is currently a faculty member at Reykjavik University in Iceland. She's also director of the Icelandic Centre for Social Research and Analysis, which she founded over a decade ago in Iceland. But more importantly, she's with us as a research professor here at Teachers College in the Department of Health and Behavior Studies. And today she's going to be talking about a study that is growing out of a decade's worth of work that she and her colleagues have been doing, looking at both risk and protective factors in children and adolescents, and the impact of those factors on their eventual human development and health trajectory. I'm delighted that she's also working with a larger group, a group of scientists from the UK, as well as Iceland and North America, including myself. And we are beginning to launch a longer-term longitudinal study that we hope will be funded very shortly, thanks to the efforts of Inga Dora. So our speaker is Inga Dora Sigfusdottir. She's here. Let's welcome her, and she'll be speaking about us.
We're facing a challenge. Suicide rates have gone up by 60% worldwide for the last 4 decades, and are now among the 3 leading causes of death among adolescents. Substance use, similarly, has been on the rise in many countries in Europe, specifically, among adolescents. So out of 28 countries that took part in the ESPAT study, in 23 there was a constant and substantial increase in substance use, as we see here, between the years 1995 and 2003. This needs to be changed. The question is how? For the last 15 years, my colleagues and I have focused on that question and others related to that, figuring out how society affects the individual, trying to disentangle the complex interplay between different societal institutes, the family, the school, the peer group, in order to identify risk and protective factors for adolescent health and behavior. Today, I want to give you an overview of that, and I apologize if the title is misleading, because when I started thought processing this presentation, I realized that if I only talked about where we're heading, I would be starting a book at page 43. So I have to give you an overview of what we've been doing in the last years, or the last decade or so, and how our findings have been used, and hence I will tell you where we're heading. So let's start by looking at how things were in Iceland some years back. They were similar to what we're now experiencing in many other European countries. Through the 90s, substance use had been increasing constantly. In 98, approximately 17% of 15-year-olds had tried hashish, which was the highest frequency to be measured in Iceland, and over 80% reported that they had used alcohol once or more in their lives. These are 15-year-olds. So in spite of our prevention efforts at the time, which mainly had focused on educating adolescents about the negative sides of substance use and teaching them to say no to drugs, substance use was constantly on the rise. At this point, in '97, a group of researchers, policymakers, and practitioners working with children and adolescents decided to try out a new approach in prevention to see whether it might be possible to reverse this upward trend by doing 3 key things that we see here: basing the work on evidence, on studies showing us how to add to the protection in the lives of adolescents and minimizing risks, by using a community-based bottom-up approach, and third, by creating a dialogue between researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. We wanted to change what we believed looked too much like this, where research, policy, and practice are 3 separate aspects, with scientists publishing their findings, not knowing and often not caring whether they come of any use in society. Into this. where there's actually a dialogue going on. I have been so fortunate to work with this group from the start. As a part of this effort has been one of the projects that have been carried out at the Center for Social Research and Analysis, a research center that I founded in 1999. Through the center, we have aimed to do three things. First, to advance and distribute new knowledge on the social determinants of health, well-being, and behavior of young people. Second, to enhance the quality of life of young people through evidence-based research. And third, we've sought to create a venue for international collaboration of scholars, specifically for the education and training of young researchers. In addition, and perhaps more importantly, we've worked closely with various government and non-government organizations, and backed up by their support, we've been able to carry out or establish a nationwide annually updated database on various aspects of health and behavior among children and adolescents. This database is now of interest to numerous scholars, both inside and outside of Iceland, as well as serving as a foundation for policy work for young people in Iceland, and now in about 20 other European countries. So let's take a look at what we have learned. And I want to focus a little bit on the issue of the theme of substance use. In 1998, we published a book in Icelandic. It was called The Social Circumstances of Substance Use Among Adolescents. And that book laid the foundation for the prevention work ahead. In many ways, our findings were in accordance with the logic of delinquency theories and studies carried out in other countries. We learned, however, that in some ways, the findings or Icelandic circumstances needed an Icelandic tailored policy. We learned, for example, that Icelandic adolescents consumed alcohol differently than adolescents in Southern Europe, whereas 1%, 2%, or 3% of 15-year-olds in Southern Europe had become drunk 10 times or more. The proportion among their Icelandic peers, as well as Scandinavian and British, was over 20%. Similarly, unwelcome incidents like accidents or injuries related to alcohol consumption were more common in Iceland than in most of the European countries. A part of the explanation was a very liberal view towards adolescent drinking that had been in Iceland for decades and needed to be changed. We also learned that variations in substance use can be predicted as they follow cohorts, like we see here. Here we are comparing the cohort born in '84 and the one born in '95. And as we can see, a cohort that measures above average at the age of around the age of 50 or 60. However, a young cohort that starts lower also ends lower. The lesson was, it's very important to postpone the moment in the lives of young people when they have their first drink, to reach them early, or to reach the parents of young kids. At the same time, we found that adolescent attitudes and behavior do not necessarily match. So more than half of adolescents who smoke, for example, report that it is very important not to smoke and that they dislike smoking. So our efforts should therefore be much less spent on teaching them about the negative sides of substance use, we thought, more on affecting their lifestyle, behavior, by creating circumstances where they can lead healthy lives. And let's take a quick look at the main risk factors that we learned about. Like studies elsewhere have shown, the influence of the peer group, of course, is negative. The influence of extracurricular activities is beneficial. The more time adolescents spend in organized youth work or sport, the less likely they are to use substances. The more time adolescents spend together in unstructured activities, away from guides and role models who are willing to invest in conventional culture, the more likely they are to use substances. The role of parents is vital. Both do they decrease directly the likelihood of substance, but more importantly, or also, they affect friendship choices.
Yes, I have a question. So you're saying, on the one hand, peer group has negative influence on the person whether he smokes or not. And on the other hand, it is good if this person participates in sports, right?
Yes.
However,
So there is a difference. Is it okay if we take these questions, if I go through the presentation and then we discuss this? Because this is very important.
okay.
So we're talking about unstructured or structured activities. We're talking about organized youth work versus unstructured activities where they're hanging out with friends. Okay. So 3 parental factors turned out to be of most importance: perceived emotional support, monitoring adolescents whose parents know where they are and whom they are with are less likely to use substances than other adolescents. Our results also show this to be true on the school level, so showing that in schools where parents keep close contact by knowing the friends of their kids and the parents' friends, students in general are less likely to use drugs, whether or not their parents are part of this network. So it's beneficial for each student in the school. The third family factor of great importance turned out to be the amount of time spent with parents. The more time adolescents spend with their family outside of school, the less likely they are to use drugs. This subtle finding was extremely important in Icelandic circumstances, because it has been measured that given the choice of more leisure or more work, Icelanders tend to choose more work. A nation who takes pride in working long hours and counts every spare hour as an hour wasted needed to hear that the time spent with our children is of importance, the quantity of time. Quality time concept that had been overly popular in Iceland for a decade or so, or more, therefore turned out not to be our solution. We need to spend more time with them than just 2 hours on Saturdays. These findings were used as a base for prevention approach that has been used in Iceland for the last 12 years. And in 2004, a group of scholars and policymakers in Europe had heard about our efforts and contacted us to see whether we might be willing to lead the research part of a program called Youth in Europe, figuring out whether we might be able to make similar principle works in different places. And now we are working in cities all over Europe. So at the time, in 2004, I had also been asked to lead a new school of education at Reykjavik University. And that, along with starting the program all over Europe, seemed like a lot. So for that reason, as well as for the reason that I wanted TC to be sort of a prototype for my school at RU, I paid a visit to Professor John Allegrante, who greeted me with generosity, experience, vision, and commitment beyond expectations. And as a proof of how long time ago that was, I'm presenting this picture of these very young people there. We're there with Finna Bjarnadottir, the former rector of Reykjavik University. Since then, our work in Iceland and throughout Europe has been in collaboration with TC. And before I tell you where we are at, I want to quickly give you a few examples of what has changed in Iceland. Because as I mentioned, our studies were used as a foundation for a comprehensive prevention program that consisted of multiple small and large-scale projects on different levels of society. The focus was on reaching out to parents with clear messages related to the findings of the studies, for example, on the importance of spending time together, that all teenagers should be home at 10 o'clock in the evenings, and that unsupervised activities or gatherings should be avoided. At the neighborhood level, an example of a project was Parental Watch. I don't know whether I have slides. Yeah, I have that. Parental Watch that sort of was consisted of groups of parents gathering during weekend nights and walking around neighborhoods to kind of provide a positive monitoring. And at the city level, we had sort of a prepaid leisure card that was supposed to support or encourage the participation of youth in organized youth work and sports. At the national level, media campaigns were launched. So this is only just a few things that were done during this time period. And things have changed. We see that adolescents are spending more time with their parents, both on weekdays and working days and weekends. Monitoring by parents has increased. Adolescents are coming home earlier in the evenings, and they're getting more support from their parents. So it doesn't matter what, things have moved in the right direction. Monitoring by parents and unstructured or sort of unsupervised adolescent gatherings. These are the ones who say that they almost never attend. And simple as that. And substance use has declined. There's a good pattern in our results showing not only the difference in the mediating and dependent variables, but also that substance use among Icelandic adolescents decreased, while substance use among many of their European peers increased. As we see here, Iceland was the only country out of 20 countries participating in the ESPAD survey to have a consistent decrease in alcohol binge drinking or alcohol use, both alcohol binge drinking and alcohol use for the last 30 days. At the same time, Iceland moved in rankings. This is the slide that we looked at earlier when it came to binge drinking and unwelcome incidents, as we saw earlier. So this is the slide from '95. This is the slide from 2003. So you see that most of the other countries are similarly keep their similar rank, while Iceland moves down. So, and last, one more thing that I wanted to show you is that because not all local communities in Iceland partook in the prevention work, which at the time made us frustrated, but we were grateful afterwards, because that gave us an opportunity to compare the communities that had taken part consistently and the ones who had not taken part. And we could see that it didn't matter what measure we looked at, in all the measures had been what would you say, proceeded in the right direction, more so in the communities that had taken part compared to the others. So my parents know where I am in the evening. Sport participation. We can see that the general trend is positive, and in a society of only 300,000, there is a lot of spilling effect. So that's much of this work. Sort of all the kids in the country were aware of it. So along with our colleagues at TC, we published a good deal more on several themes in adolescent lives, such as on health, behavior, and academic achievement, on trends in mental health, physical activity, and BMI, on stress and its link to emotions and behavior, just to name a few. And these are some of the journals that we have been publishing in. The findings add up, making an interesting pattern, showing us that obviously any discussion of adolescents must be careful to avoid the belief that what goes on in their lives can be usefully separated from the forces that affect it from outside. All that is good and well. Yet, however, there is a lot to be learned. We're still losing kids off track to substance use, self-harm, suicides on a large scale in many places in Europe, and even in our Icelandic laboratory setting. Kids who are hard to reach are born into aversive circumstances. Poverty and child maltreatment, we know, are major sources of pain. And we have some, this is our work. Recent studies have furthermore suggested that aversive circumstances experienced early in life are particularly damaging and can have effects late into adult life. And that living in aversive circumstances under stress not only affects our behavior, but also our physiology. It gets under our skin. How that happens, or even more importantly, whether those effects may be hindered or reversed, we still need to figure out. These questions will be the focus of our work ahead. In fact, we're standing at interesting crossroads. Science is entering a new stage. Divides are disappearing, the mind and the body, nature and nurture, the individual and the environment. We now know that none of these concepts will be fully studied on their own. Our only way of understanding one is by looking at a complex combination and interaction of two or more at the same time. Also, the time has come to move from research that is heavily discipline-based towards interdisciplinary research, where we bring together people from different scientific fields with diverse skills to focus on a common scientific project. These changes, accompanied by technological innovations unknown to us a while ago, mark a new era. Ahead of us are great opportunities for a more comprehensive understanding of human health and behavior. And that's where we're heading. The life course research program that our group has started engineers these exciting opportunities. The program builds on our work so far with the key aim of more fully understanding how the environment gets under our skin, how the biological and social factors combine, and not least trying to figure out whether negative effects of difficult or stressful circumstances may be hindered or reversed. The idea is to create a thorough database where we'll follow a cohort of kids born in year 2000 over time from pre-birth and onwards. And we see here the data sources for the study that we have already done a pilot study on and know that we can, this is all data that we can use. So we have these in different data banks. We have prenatal information on mothers, health, education, and health behaviors. Birth registry information on the child when it's born. Yes, and we have blood samples from the moms, pre-birth, and from the children when after they're born. We have information from postnatal care and from standardized developmental assessments that are done regularly at the age of 18 months, 3.5 years, and 5 years. And then we have school health assessments from 6 years and 9 years from school nurses within the school system. We have information on child maltreatment from the Child Protection Registry. That we have only for the Reykjavik area, but the rest of the information we have from the whole country. And we have a lot of information from Statistics Iceland. So, although we have done a pilot study on this, but we do know that we also have information that we can link, other information that we may be able to link. For example, on hospitalization of kids, accidents, prescription, and numerous other data banks. So in fall 2012, we are going to survey a sample of 1,000 children and get their biomarkers through saliva sampling. We'll hence follow them retrospectively, linking the survey as well as the biomarker data with this official healthcare registry data that exists on children from pre-birth and onwards. Our studies so far at the research center have been population-based. We've sent questionnaires out to all schools and gotten valid responses from up to 95% of each cohort under study. In our life course project, our sample will be both. It will partly include each child in the 2000 cohort, and partly will it be a probability sample of 1,000 children from that same cohort. So for the 1,000 children, we will meet them, survey them, and get their saliva. We will meet them again at the age of 14, 16, and hopefully onwards. But for the rest of the cohort, for the 3,000 not included, because a cohort in Iceland is 4,000 kids, not included in the random sample, we'll still be able to link the registry information for everybody. So it's important to note that, that's important to note that this data that we have up here has already been pilot tested and merged. The data that we think we can get we still have to see whether we can merge that and how easy it is. The data bank hence, we believe, will be quite unique in terms of both its span from prenatal life to adolescence, as well as population coverage. We're going to make use of unique circumstances in Iceland, which is a small country with only 320,000 inhabitants that are easy to reach and generally willing to partake in studies, where information is gathered on each person from pre-birth and onwards, and all this information can be linked through a unique identification number that each person gets when he or she is born. Our theoretical approach was from three aspects. The first stems from the literature on mental health, the second from criminology, and the third is biological. Our focus will be on stress, as we see here, aversive circumstances, how life stress, for example, in the form of prenatal substance use by mothers, mental health problems, child maltreatment, and social deprivation may have effects on behavior in adolescents, as well as studying how stress gets under our skin. Our key interest, of course, is whether the negative effects of stress may be prevented or reversed. Is it possible, with adolescent support, to buffer the negative effects of stress? By drawing on these three theoretical aspects, we're able to create a logical connection between both sociological and biological research by focusing on the importance of the link between stress, physiological reactions, emotions, and behavior. For the purpose of the study, I'll come back to this later, but for the purpose of the study, we've gathered a group of outstanding scientists, as John mentioned, from both Europe and across the US, from TC, Irvine, and Northwestern. The study, therefore, is truly international, but also interdisciplinary. It's an exciting study, and it's wonderful to get an opportunity to work here at TC with excellent people in a vibrant atmosphere, and know that if we succeed in starting this properly, this study will provide opportunities for many more links, collaborations for researchers with diverse skills and theoretical perspectives. It's a different paradigm in the sense that we're creating an infrastructure for research that includes several possibilities for numerous projects. We do know that this may create problems, as we do know that we are dealing with funding agencies and committees that are used to think about research in terms of very specific hypotheses. But we sincerely hope that we'll be able to succeed to open up this new paradigm and to contribute to understanding of adolescent behavior, and hopefully in due time to adult health. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So Inga Dora's, of course, agreed to take questions or comments about what she's presented, so the floor is open for anyone who'd like to.
I'd like to say that your research is extremely impressive, and I'm delighted that John could get this opportunity for you to share your research. And I'm embarrassed also to the extent that my office is next to yours, and I had no idea that there was this large neon star on your door. I congratulate you on your research. My question is, for this longitudinal study, what is the size of the sample that you have so far, since you have begun data collection?
Right. So we have only started a pilot study. So we are in the midst of trying to get this funded. And so we have been working with just a small sample of 50 children. just to see whether all the information is actually there. And what was so good for us was that we thought this was a good idea, and we knew that there was information out there, but we realized when we started working on the pilot that it was actually much better than we had hoped for. So we're pretty optimistic, and we hope that we'll be able to carry this on.
So what's your anticipated?
So we've been working with 50 kids. We will do, you know, we will work with the registry data for this whole cohort born in 2000, which is approximately 4,000 kids. We will random sample 1,000 kids out of that group, and those kids we will meet and survey them and have their saliva samples and follow them through. So, but we were able to, we can do the rest with the registry data for each and every person due to this identification number system, which is quite wonderful for scientists.
And just as a follow-up, in terms of the society, what's the nature of the diversity in terms of socioeconomic status, for example? Do you have any immigrant populations, for example?
Yes, Iceland is, I would say, a rather homogeneous society. You know, we're, but fortunately, that has been changing. People are getting to know that there is an island there that is inhabitable, and so we have so we're at the outskirts of the edge of what's possible in living circumstances. But we have approximately maybe 10%, I would think, are people from elsewhere, from immigrants. Would you say that's right, Ofgir?
Well, I think it's 10% that is born outside, but that may be Icelanders born elsewhere too.
But I do think it's about 10%.
Right.
Of course, with the Schengen agreement and with the economy, this you know, people are moving back and forth in Europe just for jobs. And but my daughters attended. We have one mother school for immigrant children in Iceland, and my daughters attended that school. And there we had 20% of the kids in that school were from elsewhere.
And what about class diversity in terms of income?
Yeah, I mean, we have diversity. It's different from what you know here. We have this Scandinavian social welfare system that is so we do not get as poor as people get in many other places in the world, but we do have, of course, we do have diversity, and unemployment has been on the rise since 2008 after we had a huge economy crash. Just it was major with our prime minister coming to the news and ending it by saying, "God save Iceland." You know, so it was pretty.
And is there universal health care?
Yes, yeah. So, and that's what we're building on. So, you know, everybody, sort of, every mom throughout pregnancy goes to a healthcare system, and every child is seen after that, 7 times.
Different societies define risky adolescent behavior differently, and so you know, this certain things are somewhat universal, but many things change over time. So substance abuse, you know, pretty harder drugs, but alcohol use, as you suggested, and smoking are visions that have changed dramatically over time, and sexual activity as well. There's a different attitude, I think, primarily in the Europeans, and in the U.S., sex below 17 is a risk behavior, is a problem behavior. So I assume that's part of what you're going to try to understand here. And I mean, actually, some of the risk and protective factors you pointed out for substance abuse work very well for sexual activity. So how is that going to be factored into the current study?
Right. Yeah. No, you are so right. This differs somewhat across societies, and we are rather liberal when it comes to sexual activity. I would say that we would define it as a problem behavior. We have a high proportion of teenage mothers.
Yeah.
That's not a problem in Iceland because we have people living in close, it's a small society that grandmas and granddads tend to step in when there's a child that needs to be taken care of while parents are getting educated. But still, you know, but what we have done here is and this is, you know, for a grant proposal that we submitted in November. We propose to look at substance use, delinquency, and suicide behavior. Of course, as you pointed out, you know, these risk and protective factors are similar for many of these behaviors. So we might have chosen something else, and we may want to broaden it up. And so, but this was what we kind of suggested would be our sort of what we would start.
Sure.
We are going to apply for an NICHD grant, and there we will be changing this somewhat. We will be focusing on risk behavior, but also on health and immune deficiencies.
If I could just add, I think part of the reason for the focus on these problems in particular has to do with the fact that we've applied for a European Research Council grant, which is a pan-European type research support enterprise. And I think if you look at many of the European countries, not only the United Kingdom, but many of the countries that in the eastern part of Europe that have come out of the old Soviet domination, or the countries that have undergone internecine conflict, these are the kinds of things that you're seeing among children and youth in particular. So I think the focus is right for that sort of sphere. And as we go forward with the NICHD grant, I think we're going to be looking at something very different. Who else? Yeah.
I just have a question about this. You mentioned that you have a very liberal society in Iceland, and is cannabis use in particular tolerated or even legal there? And is there a drinking age?
Well, yeah, we have a drinking age of 20, so it's, I mean, it's similar to here, and that's an interesting point, because liberal is not necessarily the same. So that there are quite negative sort of norms towards cannabis use, and that's not legalized, and so we have seen, and this is something that I'm studying here with John and Ásgeir right now, that cannabis kind of sneaked up on us, and so that it hasn't been included in our surveys, so we haven't kind of defined it properly until just a few years back, and that's something that we need to look specifically into. They seem to view cannabis somewhat differently, as if that is some kind of what do you call these hälsobotany?
Well, basically the shift has been occurring in Iceland that they're changing the nature of the substance from hashish, which would be the prominent form of cannabis, to marijuana. And so after the crunch of 2008, it's all of a sudden become too expensive to import hashish. So now the grown marijuana, which was really not happening before that time. So now we've seen a massive shift in the nature of the substance in use. So generally, the use today is homegrown marijuana, whereas before 2008,
and everything homegrown, you know, is organic. Or,
we have this, yeah. I
So
guess
that has
that's
to do with
the.
easier access? Is that something to do with the easier access, I guess? Or
Yes.
Well,
growing?
there seems to be, and this is actually something that we're just waiting for data that is now running through scanning to actually observe this. But what we know from people working in treatment and so on is that the views of young people towards hashish on the one hand and marijuana seem to be very different. Marijuana seems to have this almost healthy, organic, natural,
Dietary
grassy, green,
supplement,
nice kind of label,
definition.
whereas hashish is
So
much
we need to-
perceived to
we
be
need to work on
a
that.
full-fledged drug.
Thank you. There were more questions.
I was wondering, to what extent can you capture the social networks of these children over time? Because in the beginning of the talk,
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
so I was wondering, to what extent can you capture the social networks of these children? Because in the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that peer group can have an influence, and peer group under different circumstances have differential influence. So I was wondering,
How do we measure that? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have been carrying out these surveys called Youth in Iceland and now Youth in Europe. And we actually had one city in Africa participating too, in Guinea-Bissau, that sort of have been, they are very detailed. These are questionnaires on each and every aspect of adolescent lives and their network and their health and health behavior. And so we have numerous questions on different kinds of social networks. We have some of these questionnaires in English, right? And in 20 other languages. So you could, approach me and see specifically how we do this.
Yeah.
Yes. Hi, I'm wondering what do you learn by studying the saliva of the children?
We get biomarkers from the saliva, and that will give us an opportunity to sort of measure the stress levels. We measure cortisol and alpha amylase, or how do you say that in English? Alpha amylase. And there are some other biomarkers that we are going to measure that have something to do with immune system function. And this is not my specialty, and that's the beauty of an interdisciplinary group. You need not know everything. And so, yeah.
But again, if I could comment, you may not have been at our very first or inaugural
Yeah.
HBS colloquium, but we did have Andrea Denese here last year. And it's largely the work that he's doing that's, I think, discovering that the inflammatory markers that we typically pick up later in life as part of a standard public health model, like C-reactive protein, which is measured as a marker of risk for cardiovascular disease, he has been developing evidence to suggest that people get on these trajectories much, much earlier, and the trajectories are shaped dramatically by the kinds of deprivations that you might see in the first year of life. And in fact, there's a group of anthropologists who are working with this group that are concerned about the previous generation's deprivations and collective traumas that might have happened, and how that shapes the next generation's trajectory of health. So measuring these markers from a very early stage onward is going to be an important element of this study. And going forward, I think the other opportunity gets back a little bit to Professor Wallace's questions about the nature of this community and the nature of the population. I think that it is easy to think about Iceland as being an outlier and as an exception, when in fact, if you look across the world, there are many nation states that have populations of less than 1 million. It's not as unusual as one might think. And the other, I think, real opportunity here is that because you've got a fairly captive population that can be followed readily, easily, where administrative data are readily available. And now we've demonstrated in the 50 participant pilot study can be linked to follow people individually. You've also got the opportunity later on, and I think that's why it can eventually become more of an epigenetic type study. We'll have access to human genomic data over time. And I think that's at the essence of this whole colloquium, the idea that there's a connection between our biology and our behavioral exposures and our environmental exposures. And yet, we've been approaching a lot of this from individual disciplines, one level rather than multi-level. So, I think that's sort of the take-home message of what we're trying to talk about in the colloquium, and what I think
think this work really illustrates in some ways.
So in other words, you say in due time you'll look into adult health with this population. So you're talking about chronic disease like Denise did in his
Yes.
study,
Yeah,
right?
Denise is a part of our team, and so he will have he has a special interest focus on
Chronic disease.
chronic disease.
Yeah, please.
Can I just, before, there was a person at the end of the table. Did I answer your question, or do I need to clarify anything? You were talking about unstructured and structured activities.
Actually, I still have no question because I feel on the one hand you say peer influence can have a negative impact on students' consumption of substance. On the other hand, if they participate in sports, that will have a positive influence on their consumption. However, if peers in the sports group smoke or drinking alcohol, so what would be the negative effect of the negative impact and positive impact?
Right. Yeah, I think you should think of it as a difference between structured and supervised and unstructured gatherings, rather than the peer group in general. So under circumstances where kids are participating in sports and there is an adult person, a coach, who is supervising them, they are not partaking in substances at the same time.
Yes. And last, sorry, I have two more questions.
Okay, yeah. First, I'm gonna give the word to
about to what extent you've thought about the role of cognitive appraisals of stressful situations and stressful experiences in your models, and how kind of different perceptions of sort of the stress one's experienced, how that could play out in terms of ultimate risky behavior.
Yeah, no, this is a question coming from a clinical psychologist. So tell me specifically, what are you talking about?
I'm just sort of curious about the potential protective effects of where one might sort of put a stress experience, and how you'd sort of think about it, and what sort of like internal cognitive schema you might place it into, use that term, and how different people might interpret stressful situations differently. I think of that as sort of one potential mediator or moderator of why why many people experience trauma, but not everyone develops post-traumatic stress disorder.
But that's the interesting thing, isn't it? That we do appreciate what happens to us in life differently, and what is traumatic to one person might not be to another person. So we will be looking at this will give us an opportunity to get a much more nuanced picture of all these combined facts and the way that people process the information of stress. As but we're on step one.
I think we've got time for maybe one or two more questions.
Okay, so my first question is, in one of the graphs, Iceland was the only country among other European countries to have a dramatic decrease in using those kind of bad things. I wonder whether in other countries they implemented policies as Iceland did to reduce those consumption.
Yes. We have been, there has been similar work going on in places in Norway and in Sweden, and in those places we have also seen a decrease. I would think that this is similar to what is happening here in many places in the US. And I think I have a slide, because I thought you would ask about the US. So we see that substance use in the US is kind of leveling off, and from what I've learned being here for the last 2 or 3 years, there is very good work being done in many places.
So, do you think this is the graph I was mentioning to?
Sorry? No, I don't know. I know what you were talking about. You were talking about Wait a second,
Yeah.
it's here somewhere.
Yeah,
Here, this one,
I just want to make
yeah.
sure I'm
No,
not
we've seen it in Sweden, in Norway, they're doing similar things, and it also decreased there.
So basically, Iceland was not the only country where.
It was the only country, it says here, Iceland was one of only 2 countries out of 20 to experience reductions in cigarette smoking during all 4 consecutive study periods. And the only country of 19 to experience consecutive reductions in alcohol use during the last 30 days for each of the same four periods. So it was the only country to experience a constant decrease.
And I think what you're seeing here is in response to a very intensive effort that's been based on the work of the Icelandic Centre for Research and Social Analysis to understand the interplay of these risk and protective factors and where the potentially modifiable opportunities are to intervene. And I think the big question is, to what extent can we take what's been learned here, which is consistent to some extent with what we've learned in drug prevention trials here, you know, can it be packaged in such a way and scaled up in a very different kind of scale of population? Because I think to do these parental, you didn't refer to it this way, but I know they're called parental prowls, where parents go out into the community, they prowl around the neighborhood because they're trying to provide monitoring. That may not be possible in communities because of safety issues in this country, in urban areas where they would be most needed. So one of the big challenges, I think, is to understand this experience, what can be taken from it that might also help us.
And that, of course, is what we have stressed in all the cities that we're working on with this in Europe, is that we work with the people that are there, and this needs to be culturally based. What works in one city might not work at all in another city. But we have comparative studies on risk and protective factors that we know kids are more or less all the same around the world. So we know that the risk and protective factors are more or less the same. And we can see for the cities where they are weak and where they are strong, what they might work with, and then we consult with the people on the spot, how is it possible to do that? So it needs to be culturally based.
You know, unfortunately, I think we really have run out of time today, but I certainly appreciate your having come and asked these questions, and I certainly appreciate Inga Dora having made the presentation that's stimulated the questions. So before we thank her, I do want to say just a word about Iceland. I don't know how many of you have been to Iceland, but if you get a chance to go, I certainly encourage you to travel to Iceland. I've been going there for 7 years now, and I'm really impressed, and I've become more and more impressed with the idea of situating oneself in environments. And it is an environment to which I enjoy going in part because there's a scale of life that's very appealing. And one of the things that's impressed me most about Iceland and the Nordic cultures in general has been architecture. When I was there in January, I visited the new opera hall that was built in Reykjavik, and it was built despite the crash of 2008, which just about put the country under financially. And you know, being in that space and understanding the importance of situating oneself, I thought we would, on behalf of the group, give you a copy of Andrew Dalhart's book, which is Morningside Heights, a history of the architecture and development of the space we find ourselves in today, in this great academic acropolis that comprises Columbia and all of the associated institutions. So I hope you'll enjoy this as a token of our thanks. And of course, for those of you who have been coming to the colloquium, you know that I've removed the library ownership certificate from the inside so you can get out with it. So thanks very much.
Thanks.